Give a round of applause for Harrison Scott Key.
Testing. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Is this okay? Good echo. No, appreciate it. Are you familiar with sound and sound systems and how that works? Ladies and gentlemen, rock star Jonathan Jameson, everybody. My brother-in-law was like, dude, do you know that there's a rock star who's like a priest in your town? So we went and had a few beers, and we're buddies now. And a great head of hair you got there too, man. When I see who's got hair in here, who's got a full head of hair? Any men with hair? Man, that's this dude back there. You got some nice hair, man. When I see grown men with a full head of hair, I'm like, God be with you, man. That is awesome. So yes, I'm Harrison Scott Key, famous author from here in town. And I'm going to talk about this book today. I'll read a little bit, show you some photos. Thank you again to St. John's and to Jonathan and everybody. Thank you to, it's the first author event I've done with Deviled Eggs, which is the world's smallest bartender. Give it up for the smallest bartender in the back. I did stand up for a brief time in grad school when I learned that stand-up comedians were all very sad inside, and so I didn't do it anymore after that. But I noticed that I didn't know anything about comedy, and so I just wrote my jokes at a coffee shop and then went to the comedy club, and they let me up there. But I noticed that when you said things like, I just got married, people would applaud, so that I would say stuff like that, even though I wasn't married at the time. I'd be like, I just got, and they'd be like, yeah. So thank you guys. I'll show you my other books. This is me. That's me with a mustache. I shaved today, so my wife is very upset right now. That is not my foot, but it is a foot. This is my first book, which is one of the best books I've ever written, and that was funny. Thank you. One of the best books in the English language ever written by me. This book is really about the sort of beauty and horror of the American South, sort of told through the story of my father. This is my second book, Congratulations, Who Are You Again? Which is really about the beauty and horror of the American dream, as told through the story of my own dream and sort of my meteoric rise to non-success. And then this is my most recent book, which is about the beauty and horror of couples therapy. I can tell who's been to couples therapy, and whoever is laughing has been, and whoever's not laughing needs to go. So this book is a lot of things. It is raise your hand if you've read it, so we can applaud. Thank you so much for reading the book. You don't have to do that. Raise your hand if you own it, but you haven't read it yet, because you don't really read books. Okay. So the book is a lot of different things. It's like a true crime novel, kind of. My marriage dies at the beginning of the book, and so it's a little bit of trying to figure out who killed this thing, and is it dead? And it's funny. It's a funny book, but really it's asking a question, which is, how do you stay married? It's not a self-help book, despite the title. People are like reviewers on Goodreads are like, this is not a self-help book. People are very stupid. It's not, but it is asking a question, which is, how do you do that? Because it's really hard, it turns out, to stay married. Everybody gets divorced. Funny people get divorced. Beautiful people get divorced. Puppets get divorced. Did you guys know that Kermit and Miss Piggy were divorced? Google it. They are not together. Vampires are not real. They do not get divorced because they are not real. But I'd like to show you some photos of people I know and love who are not divorced. And two of those people are my grandparents. That's, if you've read my first book, that's Monk and Valera. His name was Monk Key. That's a true story. That's me there on the right in the little salad spinner or whatever that is. Look at that. Looks like something they would launch into space. You can tell what it feels like too. Like, oh, this was just a piece of plastic that they put the baby in. 70 years. Not divorced. They stayed married. How'd they do it? Like, not like, oh yeah, let's have a glass of wine and applaud. Like that's not easy, guys. That is as closest thing to a miracle as you'll ever see. 70 years. How do you do it? We all smile and nod like we have the anniversary parties and, people make toast, but it's a serious question, and a question that affects still today the majority of people on the planet. Two more people who stayed married. My parents. It's my dad on the left, as you could imagine, my mom on the right. This was at a bass fishing tournament, which is why he looks so cocky and arrogant, because my mom is holding the check that he won at the bottom. Anyway, 40 years. They stayed married for 40 years. They had both been divorced. My dad was divorced twice before they married, and she was divorced once. But they stayed married for 40 years until he died. And they were not, your grandparents are kind of a little bit removed from you. They're kind of mythical characters. They've already fought the wars when you meet them. But your parents, you kind of see them fight the wars. Like the kids see it all. And my parents were not best friends. I'm just telling you straight up. Like they were not best friends. They were not soulmates. They were nothing alike. She liked to read. And he liked to fish, he did read bass fishing magazines, but that was the only thing he had in common. He taught Sunday school at our church growing up, and she wrote all of his Sunday school lessons out. He didn't even know. Isn't that amazing? He'd be like, well, what am I going to talk about today? She'd be like, I thought we'd talk about 1 John. And then she'd walk him through the lesson and be like, yep, sounds good. Let's do it. They were nothing alike, but 40 years. Two more children that have stayed married. This is my wife and me. How have we stayed married? I do not know. If you've read the book, you also do not know. But we'll talk a little bit about that today. Let me read something for you. So I just got tired of flipping through the book. So everything I'm going to read to you from this is from the book. Okay. I think this is right. Yeah, okay. A man I know once asked his wife, "What would you do if I won the lottery?" She replied, "I'd take half and leave you." "Great," he said. "I won $12. Here's 6. Keep in touch." In my brief time with you today, I have only one promise. I want to tell you the truth about marriage. When I was a boy, my school staged a haunted house fundraiser. To enter, you crawled through a dark hole where children entered in twos and emerged minutes later, deeply traumatized. This was the 1980s when you could do that to children for charitable purposes. One small boy climbed out weeping, his head covered in cafeteria spaghetti. "What happens in there?" I asked. "I won't ruin it for you," a classmate said. "Please, ruin it for me," I wanted to say. This haunted house is not unlike marriage. You enter in pairs, get attacked by creatures in the dark, and emerge changed, sometimes laughing, occasionally weeping, your head covered in leftovers. What happens in there? Nobody can really say. Novels and movies give it a go, but fictive entertainments don't quite have the raw punch of nonfiction, though the relationship columns in marriage books are so often abstracted, the names changed, the players masked. In this vaulted age of information, marriage remains a black box. Wouldn't it help to find out what's in the box? Why don't we talk more about it? With all due respect to the clergy present tonight, I've never heard a wedding officiant explain the crucible of suffering that awaits every couple. They say things like, love keeps no record of wrongs, and we smile like we actually believe this. You won't hear a minister look at the couple and say, you will both grow extraordinarily comfortable with fantasies about your spouse being abducted by extraterrestrials and never returned. But this is what happens, in a way, inside every marriage. Consider the statistics. Did you know that half of all marriages end in divorce and the other half end in murder? That's not true, but it feels true. Because how do you honor the ridiculous promises you make on your wedding day? It can feel impossible. Here's what most of us know about marriage. Half do end in divorce, the average lasting 8 years. If your parents divorced, you're more likely to do the same. However, married people, if they can stick it out, are happier, healthier, and richer. What in the hell is going on inside the box? My folks had 3 divorces between them, but managed to stay married to each other for 40 years until my father's death. They fought a little, but made it work. How? What was the it that was made to work? And in what scenarios had the it not worked? And what mysterious innovations had put the it back in working condition? My wife Lauren and I married in our late 20s. There'd been some heartbreak in both our lives, but we were happy. But after 10 years and 3 beautiful daughters, apathy reigned. We stopped laughing together. We stopped dreaming. Sex got as routine as yard work. We tried therapy. My wife is highly guarded, but in counseling, she opened up. She admitted that she'd been unhappy for years, had considered leaving. She said all this with the coolness of a stone-cold killer. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. It was like the scene in a horror film when you're walking through a darkened basement and suddenly turn on a flashlight to see bodies hanging from the floor joists. Let's get out of here. We never went back to therapy. Why? Money, we had so little. Time, we had 3 kids and busy lives. Fear. I was afraid of what else I might learn about my wife if we dug any deeper. Then one day, a few years later, I learned anyway, when she coolly explained that she was in love with the neighbor. The good news was he was no longer the neighbor. The bad news was murder is illegal. The other bad news is that my wife moved out. Separation was hell. I cried so hard one night I woke up with abs. If you've cried a lot, you know exactly what I mean. The ensuing months presented a nightmare of heartbreak and housework as I took care of our 3 distraught daughters and tried to make sense of what happened. What had I missed? What could I have done differently? So when this happened, I'm kind of compressing and condensing a little bit the story of the book. If you've read the book, you know. I'm not going to go into all the gory details of it. You can read it. It is good. We are selling books out here. And please do not make Joni from the book lady take all those books home, please. When we were separated, I got a lot of advice. If you've ever been separated, you've also gotten a lot of advice. And some of it's good and some of it's bad. So I want to talk about the bad advice I got. Win her back. This sounds like good advice, right? Like win her back. But it was kind of like, I was Menelaus and she was Helen of Troy, and Paris had stolen her away, and I wanted to start the Trojan War and win my wife back. But the difference here is that nobody kidnapped my wife. She left. I didn't think winning her back, it was just too optimistic. It was too clean. As a man, I can't speak for all men, but I love to win. I love to defeat and destroy and conquer. That's a genetic defect of all men, and I felt that. But I also felt that winning her back was not maybe going to happen in the way that I thought it would. This ended up being advice that played into my pride. This was bad advice. Burn her clothes in the yard. This also is bad advice. This is more the Medea option rather than Helen of Troy. If you are familiar with Greek tragedy, that's what my life felt like at the time. I wanted scorched earth. And you feel if this has ever happened to you when you've been betrayed on any level by a colleague, a partner, a friend, you feel a lot of righteous anger. And the line between righteous and unrighteous anger is very thin. And I saw red, but I also didn't want to do this. I paid for those clothes. And didn't want my children to see me acting insane in the front yard. It's Ardsley Park, guys. I didn't want to be in Ardsley Park open chat. Did you guys see the guy burning clothes in the front yard? More bad advice. Move on. This isn't about you. This sounds like friendly advice, right? As I said in a TED Talk that I did about the book, this is sort of like telling us, like somebody who gets mugged and stabbed, that it's not about them. It's like, yeah, that's true, but like you're still bleeding and dying on the sidewalk. It kind of feels like it maybe is about you. I didn't want to move on. Moving on is my go-to. I just want to like this is like, you don't like me? That's fine. Let's move on. But I felt like there was I was being told not to move on yet, that there was some truth that was going to be discovered and learned through this experience, so maybe don't move on. I did get some good advice, including from people in this room who I love dearly. One of the best bits of advice I got was, don't have sex with your secretary. You guys are like, is this funny? I don't know if this is funny. The good news is I don't have a secretary. The bad news is I totally would have done this, because you are so sad and lonely when this kind of thing happens to you. You want affection everywhere. I mean, I was petting every dog I saw, cats, people. It was a lot, but this was really, really good advice. Fight for her. This was good advice. The good advice is almost always confusing. Fight for her. A friend of mine, I was not far from here, just a few blocks from here. I just found out what it was going on. I didn't know what to do. When the rug gets pulled out from under you, you don't know what to do. Your world is turned upside down. And this friend, who is a friend of my wife's, she called. Lauren had told her what was going on, and so she called me, and she's like, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Like, what do? Your wife says she's moving out. She doesn't love you. She wants to marry this guy who used to borrow your chainsaw. A guy who was opposite from me in every way. I was so confused. And she said, I went to others seeking advice, and as you'll learn in the book, there were others who urged me to judgment. And that didn't feel right yet either. And this person said, "You're going to fight for her, right?" And I was so confused. Like, this sounded good. This sounded like good advice, like fighting for my wife. It didn't say like win her back, reconcile. Like, my wife seemed to have no interest in falling or being in love with me at the time. But the idea of like fighting for her, that was something that awoke something in my heart. I didn't know quite what that looked like. Like, would it be me with like a stereo like John Cusack? Probably not. That what turns out to be fighting for her and fighting for our marriage and our family looked very different than I thought it would. But I got to say this, I liked the idea of this. As a man, I liked the idea, like fighting. Okay, I can do that. But it turned out to be the hardest thing I ever did. More good advice that was awful. Look in the mirror. A good buddy of mine, Jimbo, who's a therapist in town, and many of you probably go to him. He said, if this is going to work out, like if you really are going to reconcile, because now I was going to fight for my wife, so I was going to figure it out. He said, both people in the relationship kind of have to own their part in it. And he was not saying I caused the affair, but he was saying that I had to think about what I did to make the marriage not a fun place to be. So this is what fighting for my marriage looked like. It looked like looking in the mirror. It was a scary thing. When I looked, so people ask, like, well, what did you see? This is what I saw when I looked in the mirror. No, this is what I saw when I looked in the mirror. Sad pit. I thought I was a loyal and devoted ally of my wife when I was really more like this guy, selfish, kind of insane. I like to think that I was like Grover, who's adventurous and hardworking, but I was really more like this guy, cranky all the time. I'm a very cynical person, and this was very hard to think that you are the life of the party and to realize that you're the death of it. I like to think that I'm a funny guy, and I am a clown in a good way, that people like to have around. Somebody who is silly and a little weird and makes every moment interesting. And I was a clown. I was more like this clown. He murders people, this clown. It was tough. When I looked in the mirror, I thought I saw a guy who had never hurt his wife that much. And this guy had not hurt his wife because this guy had just gotten married. This was his wedding day. I hadn't done nothing to her yet because we just got married. In reality, this guy had done a lot to hurt his wife because this guy had been married to her for more than 15 years. And even if you're a good dude, if you are a good wife, whatever those phrases mean, you have given your spouse plenty of reasons to resent you over the years. So I'll read a little more because that was dark. Okay. Okay. So let me tell you a few more things I saw in the mirror. I'm abrasive. I brag. I'm so good at bragging. I interrupt others constantly. I say I care about people, but I don't even have the decency to remember names. I've lived next to my neighbor for 10 years, and I can tell you for a fact that her name is either Janet, Joy, Cheryl, or Brenda. That's true, isn't it? She's like, my wife is nodding up here. I was angry at me, at her, at our collective refusal to openly discuss what can go wrong in a marriage. I'm a narrative learner. I need stories. Only after my marriage imploded did people start to share them. You should talk to so-and-so about this, friends would say quietly. Same story. Exact thing happened to what's his name, they said, but don't tell him I told you. Would hearing these stories sooner have saved our marriage? My therapist suggested I try writing about my experiences, to process. So fine, I started writing. The color of the light on the morning she confessed, the plot twist of my having been friends with this other man, what it feels like to sleep diagonal on an empty bed. In the writing, I came to terms with some difficult truths, such as how I was as much a villain here as anyone. And the plot wasn't done twisting yet, because one day she called and asked if she could come home. Do you even want to be married to me? I said. I want to try, she said. That was like the most honest, wedding vow you could ever imagine. I want to try. And so we began walking the long, weird road of reconciliation. We found a great therapist. Marriage counseling, I discovered, is actually quite fun, like listening to a riveting new podcast about your actual murder. Exhilarating to finally hear the truth, and gruesome to finally hear the truth. Men like to think themselves brave. I dare you to see how brave you are. For example, my wife and I were so bad at communicating that by our second session, Dr. Berman had us talking to each other with the aid of a stuffed manatee. Sometimes it was a tiny panda, and sometimes it was a thing called Mr. Pickle, who looked like Karl Marx and a cucumber had a baby. You want to talk about courage? Try staring at this as your wife describes how this other man made her feel beautiful, happy, and safe, which is bad enough to hear, and even worse when it's coming from a pickle. That did happen, didn't it? She'd be like, da, 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 and I'd be like, so awful. For all the weirdness of this approach, Dr. Berman helped me see what I hadn't wanted to see for many years. We didn't even talk about infidelity very much after the first few sessions. The affair, he showed us, was a MacGuffin, a brutal plot device that activated the real question: who are we? What is our duty to one another in this nasty and brutish life? He asked about childhoods, fathers, mothers, how we didn't fight, how we didn't talk about not fighting, her long refusal to address her pain, and my refusal to listen. How easy it was to fixate on the MacGuffin of the betrayal, the drama of its many salacious scenes, the secrets, the Taylor Swiftness of it all. Therapy showed me my unlovability in all its grotesque horror. One of your greatest misconceptions is that you're easy to live with. You're not. You're a monster. Good counseling reveals this fact, though you'd prefer to blame others, your partner, your parents, POTUS, SCOTUS, whose monstrousness is so much easier to see. Therapist Esther Perel reminds us that the brutal honesties made possible by an affair can actually strengthen a marriage. Some people, she writes, end up with the most honest relationship they've ever had. A study in the Journal for Consulting and Clinical Psychology actually reports that, quote, couples who had an affair and who revealed this affair prior to or during therapy showed greater improvement than marriages who experienced no infidelity at all. Don't have an affair just to have a great marriage. Confession has a miraculous reviving effect even if you remained faithful despite your unhappiness or your sexual boredom. Say you've at least thought about it. You have. Admit it. You've probably imagined disrobing a colleague in a luxury hotel room so often that you could tell a sketch artist what they look like in the shower. What will you do about these thoughts? And if you're still reluctant to visit a counselor, consider it's much easier to find a marriage therapist than it once was, and health insurance is now more likely to help with costs thanks to federal legislation. And for all its horrors, the pandemic normalized virtual therapy. Lauren has Zoomed from her car at work while I logged in from the driveway, a box of wine at my feet. The biggest hurdles to counseling are lower than they've ever been. During the year she came home, we had good days, bad days, strange and beautiful days. I wrote about it all, trying to get my mind around the madness and the miracle of our marriage. What I wrote became this book. One day, long before we had this book cover, before I even had a title, I summoned the courage to show her the pages. It's a case study in marriage, I said. Don't worry, it's funny and horrifying. She read it and did not murder me afterwards, which was a good sign. A few weeks later, she sent me her own story, a testimony of what she'd seen and done and who she was now. Excuse me. We passed our stories around to friends who handed them back a few days later with haunted looks. Some of them knew, but not everybody, until they did, until we told our story. Stories beget stories. Soon these friends were in our driveway, sharing their own tales from the black box. These people, many of whom we'd known for years, told us secrets about themselves we had not known. Alcoholism, unresolved childhood traumas, cage match brawls, depression that drove spouses away, and affairs. So many affairs. Oh my gosh. We toured one another's black boxes with the lights on. Suddenly, our own failings, which had made us pariahs to some, did not seem so catastrophic. Likewise, learning how others had survived made our own healing possible. Nearly 2 years after Lauren came home, we gathered a group of 50 friends at our church to read a little from the book. This was not the G-rated cliche you so often hear in religious settings. I spoke about my distrust of therapy and willful blindness to my wife's pain and loneliness. She spoke about how that loneliness became less lonely in the company of someone else and what she did and did not find there. I wanted to throw up, and so did she. Afterwards, there were many hugs, but others couldn't hardly make eye contact. Some couples walked out with dread in their eyes. Maybe that's why nobody talks honestly about what happens in a marriage. We don't really want to know. What if we aren't strong enough to fight the monsters that might awaken there should we turn on the lights? So we've opened up the doors to our marriage. The good, the bad, the really bad. It was scary as hell to publish this book. I didn't know if the world was going to like it or hate it. The book's been out for 4 months now, and with total humility, I can say that the reviews have been universally amazing. Thank you, Jill. The Washington Post gave it a great review, which sold 1 billion books for us. Christianity Today. I have so far in the history of the world written the only book with the F word in it so many times that was given a good review by Christianity Today. That I feel like deserves applause. Garden and Gun reviewed it. Like, I did a lot of gardening during this book and had guns. How did he make this horrific story so funny, lovable, and redemptive? It's because I'm talented. These are all direct quotes. They weren't all good. I don't have any experience with this author, and based on this book, I am glad. It's hard. A bit much. Yeah. My thoughts exactly. Stick to comedy and not marriage. What does this mean? Divorce? Like, I don't know what this means. Do you like tidy romantic movies that end happily ever after? Then stay away. This was one of the truer reviews, I think. The book did not deliver on its promise to focus on the Lord's work. I never promised that. Ever. Like the Christians were like, not religious enough, and then the pagans were like, too religious. Can't win. I like humor, but I thought there was way too much in this book. What does that even mean? This person has got to be fun at parties. I wasn't aware that he is a Christian humorist. Neither was I. I did not know that. I am terrible at both of those things. Holy. I got a lot of one-word reviews. Holy was one. Crap. Holy crap. Also a review. It's very strange to read. Imagine if the world knew everything about your marriage and could just review it online. I'm looking at all of you right now. Think about that. If they knew everything, it's really awful. And we get the weirdest DMs from people. The weirdest. I'll tell you, if you buy a book, I'll tell you what kind of DMs I get. I'll show them to you. One of the strangest things about writing a book is that other people, not you, get to decide what kind of book it is, for better and worse. This book is about God, religion, religious trauma, and spiritual awakening as much as it is about marriage. Yes, I am a Christian, though I'm actually terrible at being one. I'm not good at the arrogant, triumphalist, right-wing religion where Jesus carries a flamethrower. I'm pretty terrible at the righteous social justice Christianity that longs to effect lasting political change with placards utilizing clever genital puns. I don't participate in the Women's March or the MLK Day parade, and when abortion-themed parades head my way, pro or con, doesn't matter, I run the other way. I marched once in a pirate parade and instantly regretted it. On Tybee. For many of my readers, Christianity is pretty insane, and it is. It can sometimes feel insane to subject yourself to an ancient religion that dares you to live according to a collection of primitive writings featuring more murder and foreskin content than is perhaps advisable for young children. The central theme of its stories being that everyone should imitate the strange behaviors of a divine hayseed born in a Palestinian cowshed to an 8th grader who just woke up one day pregnant. But I actually believe the Christmas story really happened. I've known many teenage mothers who are virgins. They're called Baptists. That joke kills in Mississippi. They love that joke. They're like, you, he's talking about you. So yeah, my wife, I'm almost done, don't worry. So yeah, my wife and I wrote this book, and it's weird and religious and sacrilegious and scary as hell and totally raw. Some people have asked why we would write such a scandalous story. I don't know what to say. We didn't write this book for the money. We wrote it for what the money will allow us to buy. It's different. The real truth is this: when you witness a miracle, you want to tell people about it. When you get sucked into hell and make it out alive, you want the world to know what you saw there. Lauren and I want the world to know that a dead marriage can live again if you're insane enough to try and brave enough to fight the monster you see in the mirror. You can't do it alone. I'm so grateful for all the people who helped us through our nightmare. I could give you 100 names like Soren, Jimbo, Jason, Janet, Joy, Cheryl, and or Brenda. Sorry. This is my wife and me and our girls. Mostly, I wrote this book for our daughters. I suppose we've given our daughters enough trauma to turn all three into artists or writers. But we're still here, a nuclear family, detonated but not destroyed. We won't be traumatizing our children with our divorce. We'll traumatize them with our marriage as God intended. My wife and I are on a new road now. On March 8th, 2003, the day we got married, Lauren and I crawled into the haunted house of marriage and have come out the other end deeply traumatized, still healing, but together. We want others to know what can happen inside the box if you're not careful. Perhaps all this storytelling will scandalize our children, but I doubt it. We've had more family meetings than the characters of Succession. We want them to know that even the best marriages will get bad. Our black box is now an open house, free to all who want to look around. Come on in. I won't ruin it for you. Thank you. You come on up.
Yeah, I'll scoot over here. Thank you.
I'll show the foot. It's my daughter's foot. That's our youngest daughter, Ferris. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll invite Lauren Key up too, and I'm going to start us off just with a couple questions, and then we'll open it up, and it's time for you all to ask questions. It's a wild book.
Test.
I realize I didn't give you an introduction, but I'll give you an afterword later as I let you get out to sign books later.
Thank you.
So yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, first off, when I listened to the book, which is nice because you read it, and I love that. But I think, like, when you read a book that is about heavy stuff, you want to see in those characters something that's totally different than you and be like, oh, I get it. I know why this happened. But I think what hit me is that you guys had a very normal relate, and I could see me in both of you, and just it's really, and I think in your chapter you mentioned that Christians don't want to talk about marriage really and about the challenges of marriage. And why do you think that is? Why do we avoid that? I mean, I guess
Take it away.
Take it away. Yeah.
Lauren Key, everybody.
All right.
Give her a round of applause. Why do Christians not want to talk about, or people?
I guess.
People.
I mean, I get, and we're in the South too, and there's a sort of cultural thing, right?
Yeah.
In some ways.
There's nothing wrong with us down here, Jonathan.
Oops.
You want to take that?
I mean, I found that it wasn't just marriage. It was anything messy in general. It was very hard for us to connect with people our age in similar walks of life that really were willing to engage in any sort of trauma or drama or hurt or pain. It was just so surface level. It was, and I mean, I felt that in my childhood as well. It wasn't just as an adult being a Christian, but even as a child of, if you really have enough faith and if you really love Jesus enough, like, sure, bad things can happen, but we just move on, right? And we don't really want to. We want to just smooth over it. We don't really want to get into the mess. So I've often thought how helpful I would have been to myself. I needed a me 20 years ago, honestly.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, I think when people talk about having an affair, it's so shameful. And not that I didn't feel shame. Of course I did. But I, on the other side, I no longer feel shame. And we can back up and get to how I got to that place. But I needed someone like me that was willing to say, like, yeah, I did some real bad shit, but some people loved me through it. And you can get to the other side. I didn't feel like I had anybody at the time. I do now. At the time when I was wrestling with so many things, even as a child, as a college student, I didn't have a me.
Ditto. I mean, I would say that's, yeah, it's, we've got some people here on the front row who are dear friends of ours. And people who were not at all afraid to like go to the dark stuff. It's very scary to look in the mirror. It is very, that scene in Return of the Jedi. No, sorry, Empire Strikes Back. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for bringing this up, but the scene where Luke goes into the woods and he fights Darth Vader and then he kills him and it's like his face in there. I mean, that's, like some pretty deep Jungian stuff going on there. That's what happens when you look in the mirror and you go to the dark place. You end up seeing the darkest stuff inside you, and that's just scary. So it's a pretty simple answer. People are really afraid of what's inside of them. And they maybe don't have the community or the tools to handle that stuff. Maybe, it's hard to find a good therapist. It is. It's hard. And then you've got to tell them everything about yourself, and that's so awful. Like, the whole first 2 or 3 sessions are just talking about your childhood. Finding great friends is hard. It is so difficult. And so I think people realize maybe they don't have the tools to deal with the darkness they see there, and so they don't want to talk about it because it might throw everything. Everybody's spinning so many plates. You got the kids in school, you got your job, your career, you got your house. You're trying to keep it all together. I think people are just afraid of that until it all blows up, and then you wish you had the therapist and the network and the friends.
Yeah. And that's, to me, the weird thing. On one hand, it's the Christians that don't want to talk about the real stuff. But then, strangely enough, the church is one of the few places where we, confess, hypothetically, depending on which church you go to. If you come to St. John's, you definitely confess your sins. We say we're miserable sinners, right? That's in our confession. And so we admit to this fact that we aren't perfect. And, I mean, to me, that was one of the amazing things in the book. It wasn't about finding the evil in what the other person did, but it also had that sort of self-reflection about, your own, the darkness you see inside. But I guess what I'm saying is, what I want to ask is, the church was part of the problem that you weren't able to ask the questions, but then in the end, the church offers possibilities, and it seemed like, faith was part of what saved your marriage too. Yeah. So how did you find that to be the case?
I'll take this one. I mean, it's as much a spiritual memoir as a book about marriage. If you've read it, you know that. Because when you're dealing with one of these intense moments of your life, finding out that everything you thought about your life, or a lot of it, was a lie, and that your life as you knew it was over, you immediately are looking for wisdom that does not tarnish. You're looking for the real deal. What is the line? Where shall wisdom be found? The eagle can't see it; he's way up high. The fish in the sea can't see it, though they're down low. Maybe that's a song and not in the Bible. I don't know. Fishes in the sea. I don't know. You're looking for wisdom, and so where I looked for wisdom everywhere, but my faith and the faith I had grown up with, the way I describe it, it's sort of like, if you buy an old house, or if your grandparents have a old, farmhouse out in the country, and you're a kid and you go playing out at the old farmhouse, at some point you end up at the barn. And you go into the barn, and there's a bunch of old tools in the barn that you don't know what they do. And any little boy or girl who's ever played out in the country at your grandfather's farmhouse know what I mean. You go out there and you're like, what was that? They're all rusted over and hanging from the ceiling. And for me, that was what my faith was in the midst of this. I like wandered out into the farmhouse back behind, like the shed out behind the house, and I was like, all right, I've grown up with this idea of forgiveness and mercy and marriage and commitment and covenants and all that stuff. Let's go see what these tools do. Do these things work? And so that's why there's so many spiritual questions and moments in the book for both of us. There were, just like your question about why don't we talk about bad stuff, I think we've both found that in the institutional church, there was not a lot of room for just talking about, like, really being honest. I can remember, like, in Sunday school, I say this in the book, they would take prayer requests before Sunday school. And I'm like, and it was always like, I want to pray for my aunt's having knee surgery, and I'm looking around and everybody's marriage is falling apart. And I'm like, should we pray for our marriages? And it's like every now and then I'd be like, I have a prayer request. I feel really sad inside. Can you imagine? That freaked people out. My wife was next to me and she's like, stop it, what are you doing? I was like, colors are grayer than they used to be. You can't do that in most churches. You can't. It's too scary, man. Like, people are like, that's great. Not today, buddy. Like, go to therapy for that. And we found a group of people and a church where we can do that. You have to have some discretion. You can't be constantly downing everybody all the time, Katie. I'm sorry, she's a friend of mine. Just kidding. She's so mad that I just did that. But a group of people where I can text. I have friends I can text and I can say, dude, like, things are very bad. Can you come over here? Can you call me? And they will do that, including our pastor and our elders and others at the church. And that changed everything, man. And it's not just spiritual. It was, when we were going through the thick of it, these were doing what Southern churches do best. They were bringing food over. And it was awesome. When Lauren moved back in, she walked into the house, like, literally, and there was food in the kitchen. She was like, who brought all this food? I was like, our church did, because we're, like, suffering terribly. And she was like, awesome, that's great, I guess. I'll have some cake. So it was very physical, tangible moments when... So this guy, can I pick on you for a second, Jason? So Jason put me on, he's so mad that I'm doing this right now, but he put me on speed dial, and he's like, dude, you call me. You said that. You said, you call me if anything goes wrong. If you are feeling like you want to hurt yourself or hurt somebody, whatever. And so now he butt dials me, like, every 2 weeks. Now, this is what's awesome. At first, he's like, dude, sorry, butt dial. Like, he'd call me, and I'd be like, are you okay? What's wrong? And he's like, no, it's just an accidental butt dial. And this happened over a course of a few weeks and months. But now when it happens, we don't even text about it. Like, he fake calls me, and I'm like, I don't answer it, and, like, I know it was accidental. But that is like reassurance that I have friends out there and that are right on the other side of the line. And that is powerful. So every time you butt dial me, I'm like, thanks for Jason, man. I love that guy.
That's great. Well, I can ask more questions, but I want to open it up to everybody. So raise your hand if you have a question. And try to say it loud.
Or we're also taking prayer requests.
Yeah. We'll pray for you on. Yes, Connie.
How do you feel your level of trust is with each other now as compared to maybe when you were going through therapy in the earlier stages?
She asked, how is our level of trust? It's a little personal. Just kidding. I did it. I wrote the book. She wrote the book. It's fine. Do you want to take that? I do not want to answer that question. I'm just kidding. You can take that level of trust. It's tough. Talking about it, I mean.
Yeah, I don't really know how to answer that. I mean, I think it's just, I told my sister recently, I mean, I still don't really like to talk about my feelings. I don't really like to talk in general. I mean, sometimes I feel like Harrison married me just so he can talk more. right?
Sorry.
So that's still hard, and I think that the book is, and I'll try to answer your question. I feel like the book is our story. I know that's dumb to say, like, duh, yeah, of course, it's a story. But the book is part of our story now.
Oh, the story is a part of the story.
Like this. Like, the
Yeah.
fact that we have to talk about this in microphones in front of strangers more than once, like, that is now part of the redemptive story, and has forced me to continue to wrestle with demons, and for us to continue to talk, and not to like rehash it and like rake each other over the coals every 5 minutes, but it keeps it fresh in a healthy way, because it's so public. I mean, it's
awful.
It's
Yeah.
as public as a thing could be. Like Harrison said, like, imagine not just your marriage, but kind of like the worst thing that's ever happened to you, or the worst thing you've ever done, and someone being able to give it 5 stars or not on Amazon. Like, that's awful. So I think that, trust is like anything else. It's time, and it's one brick at a time, and it's rebuilding our life together, and just relearning how to be married and how to be people. We had like this major toilet poo water catastrophe. It was so bad. It was yesterday.
She cussed at me.
It was so bad. It was like one of those like horror movie, like awful toilet water everywhere, like really, really bad. And we were about to have friends over, and so we were like yelling at each other and screaming. And I have like bleach, and he has towels, and he's like, it's just awful. And I remember thinking, if we had had that kind of like moment of like fighting and like trauma and like poo water, if that had happened like 10 years ago, I would have been like, that's it, we're getting divorced. Like, this is people. You just don't yell and scream and slosh through poo water without getting divorced. Like, so my childhood taught me that like fighting equals divorce, because that's what I knew. So yes, there's so much more trust because we're still here. He wants me here. He asked me to come tonight. I didn't have to be here. He would happily talk all by himself.
You're so funny.
But yeah, we've just learned how to live together again, and love together, and fight, and it not automatically mean we must be falling apart. It feels so good to be able to, like, you're a stupid idiot with the plunger, and then be like, okay.
She thought I was plunging all wrong.
He was. He made some really poor choices yesterday.
I did not clog the toilet.
I didn't either.
I want everybody to know.
We have 3 kids.
I was solving problems for the family.
It was just a weird way of God reminding me that we are really in this together, and that that we're okay. It was the best scenario of a poo water story there could be.
Next question. Somebody over here. I'm feeling the room. There you go, right there.
Go ahead.
No, it's you. It's your turn. Go ahead.
I want you guys to fight over me.
Over you?
Yeah. No. My question is for you. You called him up and said that you want to come back. Tell me what was going through your mind. Like, how did you get to that point? Like, I want to come back. Because you were out. You were in your new life.
Yeah. Have you read the book? Okay, that's fine.
All that is definitely addressed. Like that, we talk about that.
I'll give you a little.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
she said, she's asking about the moment when I called him and said I wanted to come home, and kind of how I had gotten, like, my thought process of how I had gotten to that place. Honestly, not to sound too voodoo spiritual, it did not feel, it felt like an out-of-body experience. It felt like
a lot of people that loved me a lot prayed a lot. And it was beyond me. It was not what I thought I wanted. And it was truly someone else speaking that said, get me out of this place and bring me home. And then my heart caught up eventually. I mean, I definitely remember moments of like, oh, like this is gonna be so hard, and like just looking at him, it's like, oh, I'm just gonna feel like crap all the time. And he did not make me feel like that. I mean, he definitely could have held it over my head and been like, I get to pick dinner forever because you had an affair. It definitely didn't feel like that. But in that moment of like, come get me, I want to come home, it definitely felt like serious spiritual warfare, and Jesus won.
I was confused when she asked to come home. I was like, she was like, will you come get me? And I say all this in the book. It's a very dramatic moment, but I was definitely like, felt very similar. Although in that instance, it did not feel like I was going to like rescue my wife at the OK Corral. It was more like at that point, she was not my wife anymore. She was just a friend that I had lived with for a long, long time, and the mother of our daughters, and a woman that I felt like if a friend called me and said, like, come get me, I would do it. And I was like, I think this woman is a friend right now. I'll go get her. I didn't know if I was going to go get her and she was going to come home. I mean, you came home, and then I was like, you can't stay here. This is weird. And she didn't. She didn't stay home at first, and you can find out all the exciting details. But it was definitely a very strange experience for both of us. It was so weird. Yeah. Okay, over here, we'll take a question from this side of the Sunday school class.
The orange dress in the back has one.
Yes. Where was I drawn to the idea of fighting for her? Oh. It's a little bit of a mystery. She asked, like, how do you, like, what made you want to fight for your marriage, essentially, and not just say, screw this. I can't fully answer that question. Don't quite know. It's very mysterious. But I will say that the memory of my parents and grandparents and their marriages. The idea I have found very toxic, the idea of soulmates and best friends. The people who on social media who brag about having married their best friend while they're taking selfies at Disney on their adult Disney trip, those people are psychotic. But you see this on social media. I married my best friend. He's my soulmate. I'm so happy to celebrate 30 years with my best friend. And like, if you're struggling in your marriage and you see that, you're like, well, I didn't marry my best friend, so something's wrong, right? I feel like that's been very toxic to marriage. The idea that you're going to marry your best friend. Like, you might marry your best friend, but the thing is, I mean, I'm not the first person to say this, but like, if you're married long enough, you're like married to 5 different people, and you're 5 different people in your marriage. You're so different. People change so much. When I look back at my younger self or her younger self, I'm like, wow, those are different people. And not just like one shade of difference, but like many shades of difference. So all that to say that when the fit hit the shan, and I was driving out. I went and drove out to Tybee and to Doc's Bar. You guys know where Doc's Bar is? You can smoke inside. It's just like a museum. And I drove out there to get a beer. I was like, I got to get out of this place. And I thought about my grandparents, and I thought about my parents, and it, not just like about their long-lasting marriages, but about the choice. Like, life absolutely sucker punches all of us. Some of us more than others, and many times. And if you're married long enough, it'll definitely do it. If you have children, if you're alive long enough, it'll happen. And you have a choice when you get sucker punched by life over and over again to be bitter or not to be. You have a choice. And I thought about my grandparents, especially my grandfather. Life had been very difficult for my grandfather. He saw a brother die. He was shot. His youngest brother was shot when he was 25. He saw one of his parents murdered. He buried a child. He buried a daughter, my aunt, and I never saw bitterness in that man. And that is a miracle. And so I thought about him. And then I thought about my parents. My parents saw a lot of sadness in their lives. And I never saw bitterness in them. And those models are very powerful when you're struggling. And so I'm driving out to Docks. I want to smoke the world's largest cigarette right now and drink the world's largest beer. But I did not feel anger because of those people, not because of me. Because I'm a terrible person. Just read my books. I'm not a good person most days. But I thought about these people and who were never bitter. And it felt like, well, I don't get to be either. Because they're choosing goodness and beauty and wholeness, made my life better as a young person growing up. They kept it together and didn't turn bitter. And I thought, okay, well, that's not an option for me, because I've seen good people suffer through this or worse and not turn bitter. So I don't get to. The good men before me didn't do it, so I'm not going to do it. And maybe that sounds shallow to some of you, but it felt like I was standing in a line of people. And they had held up their end of the bargain, so it was my turn now. And maybe it's marriage, maybe it's infidelity, maybe it's a child dying, maybe it's cancer. Like, it's different for all of us, right? But you can choose to get better or choose not to. And I felt compelled not to be. That was a big part of it. It's such a funny book. Sorry. See, I made you laugh. We'll take one more question, then we'll stop, and then I'll sign books, and you'll buy a bunch. Yeah.
I'm really curious. I read your first book. It was honest and it was real, and this takes it and just dials it up to 11.
Yeah.
As a writer, I would imagine that's the first place you go, is to just get all those thoughts down on paper. I'm really curious to know the trajectory, and like when you started writing about it, what was on your mind, what were you trying to do
With this third book.
that brings you all the way, to sitting here in front
Yeah.
of us, convincing her to participate. I mean, it's just.
So his question was, How do you? Well, what's the process of writing something this visceral and raw? Okay. That's tough. I mean, in a sense, my first two books were just prologue to this. Somebody could write a dissertation about my literary journey, and because if you've read the other two books, and especially if you've read them after the third book, you see it all. It's all there. This story is in those first two books. It is absolutely there. You see me dancing around it and being confused by it, and you can almost see you almost want to be like, Harrison, wait. You can see that something big is coming in those first two books. So in some ways, those books were a prologue to this and a practice. The idea of writing about yourself publicly. My first book was really like a eulogy to my father, so that was hard. Not as intense as this, but that was hard. I mean, every book event, everybody's laughing about my dad's stories, and I'm like, this is like my eulogy to my dad, and everybody's laughing. It was strange. So those were all practice for this. This was the World Series. This was the Super Bowl of rawness. So as far as the actual process goes, it was strange. So I was originally writing a different book in which I was writing about faith and sort of how weird it is to be a Christian with a brain, how strange that is. And so I was already doing that. Sometimes I think God knew what was coming, and he was like, why don't you go do this, buddy? Because this can be useful later. So I had been working on that. I'd been writing about our wedding, which is a big part of the book, our wedding, the story of our wedding, and all the drama around that. All was a kind of forms the climax of the book in some ways. I was writing about that before I knew anything that was happening. That our marriage was kind of done. So the ground was set. It was very fertile and cultivated in a way. And then when all this went down, I started writing, and I wrote letters to her. And it was kind of like we were talking about journaling today. It was kind of like that. It was like I knew I wasn't going to I didn't think I was going to send you the letters because they were so awful. It's just the worst, ninth grade stuff. But it was good to get it out. So I was writing about it. And then in therapy, my therapist, I kept telling my therapist, she'd ask me questions. I was like, you should just read my books. I was so frustrated with her. She was like, anyway, so she would just keep asking me questions. I'm like, no, you should really read my books. And she was mad I was giving her an assignment. I was like, you should read my books and then call me. And then we'll talk about you. And so she was like, have you thought about writing about this? I read, and I was like, I'm a writer. And she was like, so are you going to write about this? I was like, sure. So I started writing and processing, and I took notes. I had a Google Doc that was just how I feel today about whatever's happening, and I would just write it all down. And normally, journaling is kind of a joke. Nobody really journals. It's weird and solipsistic and all that. But I was feeling so many feelings, and they were so intense. I would... So she lived in this carriage house in Ardsley Park when she moved out, and I would drive by real slow like a creep. I'd be like, I'm not checking on her. Drive by the house, and I'm like, that felt weird. So I go home and write that this was weird. I do not like stalking my wife. She is my wife. And then she would FaceTime. You remember when you were in the real estate classes? And you would be on break, and you would FaceTime with the girls, and she would FaceTime me, and I didn't want the part of our separation was no contact, we were not going to talk unless it was about the kids. I will pick up the kids at this time, and it was okay, that was it. I did not want to see her at all. Because it was my wilderness moment, and she would FaceTime, and I'd be smoking a pack of menthols in my driveway, and 20 ounces deep in a bottle of wine, 9 o'clock, and she would FaceTime with me to tell the girls good night. And then my phone would be and I'd be like, oh God, I don't want to see this lady. And so I would answer, and I would face the phone away from me. I didn't want to see her. And I'd be like, hold on. And I'd like walk and I'd give the phone. So I was like, that was weird. You see somebody every day of your life for almost 20 years, and then you're like not talking to them. That was so strange. So I wrote about that. And I wrote and wrote and wrote. And the storyteller in me was like, wow, this is really interesting. You should write this story. So I tried to make it a novel. And I was like, if I make this a novel, this was still when we were separated. I was like, if I make this a novel, nobody would believe it. I have to make this nonfiction, because if it was a novel, people are like, that would never happen. So she still doesn't live with me. I'll end my story with this. I called my agent, and just to tell her, because my agent and I are friends, and I was like, and Lauren moved out. We're getting a divorce. And she's like, oh my gosh, because she's my agent, so she's read all my books and knows Lauren well. And she was like, oh my gosh. And then, like, as I said in what I was reading today, she goes, that happened to me too. And I was like, how did I not know that? Like, everybody comes out of the woodwork when this kind of stuff happens. So I was like, I think I'm going to write a book about this. And maybe a novel, maybe a memoir. And she goes, but what happens if she comes home? And I was like, then it'll have a happy ending. She goes, what happens if she doesn't come home? I went, then it'll have a happy ending. I didn't know. So I just started writing it down. And you had been home for about a few weeks, and we're talking. We had so many awesome talks in the driveway on the tailgate of my truck, just sitting there talking. And I was like, I think this should be a story. I think I should write this.
And I said,
Tell us what you said.
absolutely not.
She cried and
I
cried.
cried. I stomped inside. I slammed the door. I came back out. I was like, you can write about anything else, not this.
She wanted me
I
to
was
write
so
about
mad.
Gary, our dog. She was
Anything.
like, people would love a book about a dog.
Yeah, I thought it was absolutely ridiculous that he would even consider it.
So I went, you're right. I went, you're right. So I didn't bring it up again for a year, all the while writing the book.
Sneaky.
And so a year later, so I finished it. I was like, hey, you remember, like, I don't know, like we were talking, like it was a long time ago, about a book. And I printed it out, or no, I sent it to you.
Like a bound copy. Like not a, this is a, like it was like done. In
So I told her, so it was, the real question people want to know, and that's kind of implied in your question, is like, how in the heck could you write a book like this? How could you do that? And I don't know the answer to that question. It's scary. It's incredibly scary to write a book like this. And I'm so tired of talking about it. I mean, I'm glad I wrote it. I'm glad it's out there. We get so many DMs from the absolute weirdest people in the world who are clearly touched by it, and it's helping them, whatever, that's fine. I'm so excited to get on to my next book. But I gave her the book, and I said, nobody has seen this. If you don't love it, I will burn it, and nobody will see this book ever again. And I didn't mean that. But it sounded good.
I believed you at least. At that
And
moment.
she read it, and what did you think of it?
Well, obviously.
I think you were shocked at how...
I was surprised at how much I didn't hate it.
People always feel that way about my work.
I was like, okay, it's not terrible.
The first thing she said was, it's actually funny. Thanks.
Yeah, I was surprised at the humor too. I am accustomed to reading about myself because I'm in the other two books. But obviously this was a very different story and much more raw and much more, at the time, again, it was just so raw and new for us, for me. It still felt so shameful. I'm like, I don't want anybody to know this story. Like, I only want like 3 people to know this story. Definitely not lots of people. So it really just took time and our healing and some space to get to the point where I could be enough removed to see it for what it was, which is, it's a good story. Even if we weren't in it, it's still a good story. But I did have a stipulation, and that was that I wanted to write a chapter. So chapter 37.
She was like, "There's
is
only
my-
one thing wrong with it."
It's missing mine. I just
need
knew
to
that
write
I
something for
wanted,
it.
like, this is so, I mean, his other two books, although I'm in them, they really are his stories, whereas this one is our story. And so I knew I wanted my voice in there at whatever that looked like, that I wanted my perspective in there. So I wrote a chapter, and that's in there.
It's such an awesome chapter. It's probably most people's favorite chapter in the book is your chapter because I didn't write it. If you have any other questions, just come to the book signing table.
Can I awkwardly end this by reading a paragraph of the book to you? Is
Just
that
a
weird?
paragraph? Sure,
Just
that's
paragraph.
fine. That's fine.
I just have the sense that this paragraph really sums up at least the spiritual dynamic of what we're getting out here, and then I'll give you a little bit of info and let Harrison and Lauren get out there so that, he can sign books and stuff. But this just hits home with me. So this is in the last chapter. Marriage has changed over the millennia, and that's a beautiful thing. But the prophets of this present age would have us believe marriage should exist solely for the benefit of the people in it, for their emotional, psychological, and carnal empowerment, as though matrimony is merely an extended couples spa experience featuring orgies and explosive self-actualizations that you can exit whensoever your heart desires. What if the prophets are wrong? Are we not freer than ever in human history, and sadder and more anxious and more wretched? What if marriage, at its very best, exists to remake us into beautiful new creatures we scarcely recognize? What if, in some cosmically weird way, escaping a hard marriage is not how you change? What if staying married is? So anyways, I want to give a big hand to Harrison and Lauren for coming tonight. Thank you guys so much.